America in the early 1960s was a nation speaking two languages at once. One language was confident, triumphant, almost self-congratulatory. It spoke of victory in World War II, of booming suburbs, gleaming highways, and a global struggle against communism in which the United States cast itself as the guardian of freedom. Presidents stood before cameras and spoke of liberty as America's export to the world. Textbooks described the nation as the greatest democracy in human history. The other language was quieter but sharper. It spoke in whispers and in shouts, in segregated lunch counters, in courthouse steps, in cotton fields and factory floors. It spoke of jobs denied, votes stolen, schools separated by race, neighborhoods fenced by custom and law. It spoke of a freedom promised but not delivered. By 1963, these two languages were colliding. For nearly a century after the Civil War, the United States had lived with an unresolved contradiction. The 13th Amendment had abolished slavery. The 14th had promised equal protection. The 15th had guaranteed the right to vote. But the South, through violence, law, and intimidation, had dismantled those promises piece by piece. Jim Crow was not simply segregation. It was an entire social order. It determined where one could live, eat, learn, worship, and work. It enforced itself through sheriffs, judges, and, when necessary, through terror. Lynching was not an accident of history. It was a system of control, publicly performed. Between the late 19th century and World War II, thousands of Black Americans were lynched, often with impunity, often before cheering crowds. By the mid-20th century, this system had begun to crack, but it had not yet fallen. The long fuse of change, the modern civil rights movement, did not begin in 1963. It was the product of decades of organizing, lawsuits, church meetings, and quiet courage. In 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, was founded to challenge racial injustice through the courts. Its lawyers, most notably Thurgood Marshall, chipped away at the legal foundations of segregation case by case. In 1954, Brown v. Board of Education declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional. The decision was historic, but implementation was slow and bitterly resisted. Southern governors vowed massive resistance. Schools closed rather than integrate. Federal authority wavered. White citizens' councils formed to preserve segregation under the guise of respectability. At the same time, a new generation was growing restless. In December 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, a seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus. Her arrest ignited a year-long boycott led by a young Baptist minister, Martin Luther King, Jr. The Montgomery Bus Boycott demonstrated something radical. Ordinary people, disciplined and united, could challenge injustice without violence and win. The boycott gave birth to a movement and to an institution. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, founded in 1957. Its philosophy was rooted in Christian ethics and Gandhian nonviolence. King spoke of love not as sentiment but as strategy, a force capable of exposing the moral bankruptcy of oppression. Yet even as victories accumulated, inequality deepened in other ways. Freedom without bread. By the early 1960s, many Black Americans were asking a difficult question. What is the value of civil rights without economic rights? Legal segregation might fall, but poverty remained stubborn. In northern cities, segregation wore a different face: redlining, discriminatory hiring, underfunded schools. Black workers were often the last hired and the first fired. Automation was eliminating industrial jobs. Unemployment among Black Americans was double that of whites. This concern had long been voiced by a Philip Randolph, one of the movement's elder statesmen. Randolph, a labor leader and socialist, understood that racial justice without economic justice was incomplete. In 1941, he had threatened a mass march on Washington to protest discrimination in defense industries. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, fearing international embarrassment during wartime, issued Executive Order 8802, banning such discrimination. The march was called off, but the idea endured. Randolph never forgot the power of that threat. By 1962, he believed the moment had returned. The movement fractures and grows. While King and the SCLC emphasized moral appeal and nonviolence, younger activists were pressing for more direct action. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, formed in 1960 after the Greensboro sit-ins represented a new voice. These were students who sat at lunch counters, faced mobs, went to jail, and refused to back down. They were impatient with gradualism. They lived under constant threat. Many were teenagers. Organizations did not always agree. Strategies clashed. Egos collided. But by 1963, they recognized a shared truth. Fragmentation weakened the cause. The assassination of Medgar Evers in June, 1963 shot in the driveway of his Mississippi home underscored the urgency. Violence was not slowing. It was intensifying. And then there was Birmingham. Birmingham, the breaking point. In the spring of 1963, Birmingham, Alabama, became the epicenter of the movement. Known as one of the most segregated cities in America, Birmingham was ruled by Bull Connor, the city's Commissioner of Public Safety. Connor believed in segregation not as policy but as creed. He promised to uphold it forever. King and the SCLC launched a campaign of protests and boycotts. When adults hesitated, fearful of losing jobs, or worse, children stepped forward. Hundreds of school children marched. Connor responded with police dogs and fire hoses powerful, enough to strip bark from trees. The images were broadcast worldwide.